what are some of the markers that you can use for identifying when infants become conscious, regardless of the track you take, whether you take the sensory or the cognitive track? What are some markers that would be a good test for identifying if infants are now conscious?
Yeah, so this is very, I think nowadays, very fascinating question and topic to work. So maybe it would help if I say a little bit about why I think neuromarkers are relevant. Okay.
Sure.
So we start with the hard problem of consciousness. Okay. So how consciousness emerge from physical processes. So we don't have like a definitive explanation for how this, but it doesn't mean that we cannot make progress in this area. So, and one way to make progress in this area is to try to find correlations between the brain processes and conscious experiences, okay? So try to find what are the correlations, what are the bridge between one process and another process. One way to construct those bridges and try to diminish this gap is to start with adult, normal adult conscious processing. Okay, so I ask you, are you seeing this this object? And if you say yes, I'm seeing this object, I can try to correlate what type of brain processes are emerging in your brain when you see an object and have this type of visual experiences. Mm-hmm. Also because we know that there are many ways that I can diminish your I can mask your visual experience, and part of your visual experience, there are processes in your visual experience that are unconscious processing. So I want this ambiguity, and this is very relevant for the science of consciousness. I want this ambiguity when you're seeing something consciously and when your brain is processing visual information unconsciously, okay? So I start with your reports. I'm seeing or I'm not seeing. I'm seeing this object, and or if I disrupt your visual processing, you might not see, okay? Or you might see very briefly and you might forget. Okay, I think there are many letters here, but I don't remember this letter. I just remember 3 letters. Okay, there are many ways I can create ambiguities in your visual processing. So I start with the case of your verbal reports. There is some behavior markers of consciousness. I'm asking you, you're seeing or not. And I can ask verbally, or I can ask you or give some commands that you give me some subjective evidence that you're seeing the process. I'm saying this because you can also replicate some of those experimental paradigm in animals, in primates. You can see how they react, not with verbal reports, but why they react with actions, indicate that they are seeing or not a visual stimulus.
This is the premise for the recurrent processing theory and object substitution masking, right?
Even for global workspace, if they're interested in visual processing, they can use those types of paradigm. The explanation of how the brain processes will what are the areas and the type of processes that are required for those visual process might change from theory to theory. But let's get started with this big questions to talk about the neuromarkers. So from your confirmation that you're seeing a stimulus, I can see how your brain is activated and try to find the correlation of the activation of that process. So I start with your phenomenology. You're seeing something, so your phenomenon experience. So start with that part of the phenomenology. And from the phenomenology, I try to find the bridges between the phenomenology and the physical processes, okay? And the physical process will be what? Some activation of your brain and the type of activation you have, and then theories of consciousness enters in the picture, will change from theory to theory, okay? And then it's not that easy to isolate the neuromarkers, but once you isolate the neuromarkers, having a reliable neuromarker, I can test if other creatures that don't have verbal reports, if the neuromarkers are present. So I can get from the neuromarkers of an adult, see if an infant has or not this neuromarker. If the neuromarker emerges when they are seeing some stimulus. This is not a definitive answer again, but it raised my credence that the infant might be conscious of the stimulus if the same neuropattern that I expect in the brain of an adult emerges in the case of infants. Okay, so there are some studies on pain showing that newborns, because as I said before, one interesting problem for infant consciousness is whether infants are conscious earlier or later in their development. And the most interesting question nowadays is whether newborns, neonates, if you're conscious at day one, not day one, but minute one, you're born, birth, are you conscious? I hold the view that they are conscious at birth. I try to make a case. I think there is a strong case for this idea that they are conscious at birth. There are some interesting evidence nowadays for a late pregnancy, that they might have at least some capacity. It doesn't mean that they are deploying the capacity because they might be sedating the womb. There is the amniotic liquid sedates the fetus, and the fetus might not deploying the capacity, might be in a kind of sleeping state, or kind of anesthetic state. So they might not actually deploying the capacity. But why this question is relevant? Because you also want to know if a preterm infant that born before the term age, if that creature is conscious, that infants are conscious, that preterm born is conscious or not. So you also want to know if the capacities are already there, and if they are born preterm, if they are already deploying this capacity. The evidence for preterm and late pregnancy fetus is much more noisy and confusing. So there are very few people that are making more strong affirmations about those states. But I think there is a compelling case for newborn consciousness. Neuromarkers, I don't know, maybe can I say something about the type of a neuromarker?
Definitely.
Yeah. Okay. So pain is one type. There is an interesting study. There is a pain. Pain is an interesting case, although it's a complicated case. Okay, is interesting and have been used a lot in the case of animals. Newborns, they have compelling behavior that they're trying to avoid, although they have one. Maybe this is relevant before I talk about the neuromarkers. So how you use the neuromarkers of consciousness to make a compelling case that that creature is conscious, as in the case of infant conscious. We start with, as I said before, with the case of adults. We isolate the neuromarker, and you have behavior markers you can also that correlates with the way we would behave in that case. And then we can do what we call inference the best explanation. So the best way to explain that behavior in infants is, or in animals, we can also use the same methodology, is that that behavior is performed consciously, okay? And then the question is, in the case of pain, is infants, they have the similar behavior, okay? And they have similar neural markers of consciousness as in the case of adults, okay? Why pain is more complicated than the other cases is because we still don't have, even in the case of adult, we are still not completely sure if there is what we call a neurosignature of pain, that what they have been calling for a while pain matrix. Do we have this matrix that is correlated with pain in adults? If you have that, we could just apply the same case. but it's something that is still debatable even in the case of adults, because it seems some areas might be activated even if you're not feeling pain, but you have some stimulus is salient to you. Okay, some stimulus is calling your attention, something that is strong, and you are occupying your attention in some sense. So there is some discussion if this pain matrix is actually, but even if it's not, whatever type of neuropattern adults have that correlates with pain or salient stimulus, we can find similar thing in infants. And this, I think, it's sufficient for at least have a compelling evidence that they might have. I mean, they might not react only to pain, they might react to salient, but they might react to salient consciously. Okay, so they can make some parallel. The other neuromarkers that have been recently developed are related to that I think also related to some, you asked before about some theories of consciousness are related to some theories of consciousness. One is whether the brain at birth have already the kind of functional connectivity that adult brains have. So these neuromarkers, not the neuromarkers saying that is not evidence that they are conscious of those at birth, but it's an evidence that they have at least the type of physical process or the type of architecture that at least is necessary. There is one type of structure, the thalamic structure in our brain that develops around 26 weeks of gestation. That is most of the theories would consider this necessary structure for developing consciousness, at least in humans. There is very few theories that would deny that the thalamic structure is necessary. Okay, but is all the theories, though, they don't agree in when after the thalamic structure emerged, when after that, what are the other necessary conditions that would have to be put in place for consciousness. So one idea is those functional connectivities that might be present, that they have evidence nowadays at present at birth. What are those functional connectivities? So we have a different pattern of connections in the brains that is correlated to be attentive to the environment and to be to have a kind of internal awareness. Okay, and it seems that those connectivities they work together in a reciprocal way. Like if I'm attending to a kind of external awareness, I'm attending to the environment, I have less activation in my inner awareness, in the internal connectivity, the areas that are connected for this inner awareness that is more related to introspection and to mind wandering, to when we are imagining something. So those functional connectivities, they have a kind of reciprocal way in one is activated, the other decreased, and when the other one is decreased, the other activates, like this. Mm-hmm. And this is it's something that adults, normal adults have. And what is interesting in the case of infants is that they now have compelling evidence that those functional connectivities, networks, they are already working in this reciprocal way very early. Because we thought there was in the past some evidence that they have those functional connectivities, they connect, is a long range of neurons that connect different parts of the brain. Okay, so it's not just a local activation, it's require distance areas in the brain that are connected in a very specific way. And they have now evidence that at birth, those areas are already connected They are still immature, but they're already connected. Probably the type, because the brain is still developing, the type of connection is slow and it's not as, it doesn't work with the same speed of the connection and activation the adult brain have. But those areas are already working in this type of reciprocal way, okay? Indicating some internal process and some external processing. So this is a pretty good evidence, at least, that some structures that might be required for consciousness are already in place when we are born. The second marker is related to, you can interrupt me if I just go.
I have so many questions around just the neural markers itself. Like when it comes to pain, for example, how do you prove that this is not just a reflex action, but actually a test of consciousness? Like if an infant is showing pain and it's not just a reflexive action towards pain, like to a stimulus rather, or it's actually a proof of consciousness. And similarly, when you spoke about visual stimulus and like whether someone can react to that visual stimulus, is that neural marker a marker for reportability or awareness of that stimulus, or is it actually a test for consciousness? Right? You could report something and still not be conscious, or the other way around. So many questions, but I think let's start diving into the specific theories that actually talk about these markers. So I'm going to describe the lay of the land. We have 4 popular theories that you have covered briefly, the philosophy of the problem of it, and one by one we start tackling them and what neural markers they're actually dealing with. So I'm going to talk about representation theory, integrated information theory, global workspace, and recurrent processing theory. Let's start with global workspace, because that's the one we were just about to talk about. So let's talk about Giulio Tonini's global workspace theory. What is the global workspace? What is the neural marker that they use? What does the theory tell us?
Okay, so the global workspace theory actually was formulated by Stanislas Dehaene.
Tonini is in IIT.
Yeah, it's very confusing. Yes. You can just get lost with all those names.
Yeah.
And Bernard Bars.
Yeah.
And I think it's one of it's a very relevant theory of conscious nowadays and I think the theory has an interesting formulation, and Stanley Dehaene and all his scientific approach, the neuronal approach he developed for the theory, come with I think a very compelling view. So I think one way. So you start with the question about how a behavior is not just a reflexive. Okay, because we know we can have unconscious actions. You can just react automatically to one stimulus. Okay, so one idea is not all type of behavior we would think that is there is a candidate for a conscious that would go together with a conscious experience. So I use the idea of flexible behavior as at least relevant for consciousness. So flexible behavior is the idea that you would have reactions if you have a pain experiences. You would change your strategy with flexibility, trying to find the best way to avoid that noxious stimulus, okay? So not just reflex. The reflex makes you always giving the same response, action and response to a stimulus. And the flexible behavior is...
You're adapting to it. You're learning from it.
You learn from this. It's required for you to have the experience of a past... you encounter pastly the stimulus, and then you adapt and you create new strategies, okay? It's hard to find a flexible behavior in infants because they don't have, different from animals, they don't have too much motor control. They're still developing their motor control. So you have to look for very specific areas. So we start controlling first our eye movements. You start controlling your mouth. There are many experimental paradigm with infants with pacifiers, where they can control the way they're sucking a pacifier, and this indicates some ways to control the environment. Okay, so you might use this, for instance, to see if they can control the type of auditory stimulus they prefer to hear, and this would require some kind of control that goes beyond an automatic reaction. But you cannot ask the infants to point or to indicate with their limbs or their hands. They still don't have this type of coordination. Okay, so have to look for very basic type of behaviors. And the pain, what you see, they have some, they cry. Okay, they have facial experience of pain. They have many types of attempts to avoid the painful stimulus. But as you said before, and ask, this alone cannot give us everything we need to the claim that they are conscious. But you can make a claim that those behaviors are not just reflexive behavior, it has some flexibility. And it seems that there are some cases where you can show that this information of pain is available for other systems. Okay, so there is one interesting case where you have the baby withdrawing, sucking a very hot pacifier. Okay, and this require feeling pain and have an action that is an avoidance of this pacifier. Okay. This together with neuromarkers of pain, of having the same areas activated in the brain that adult would have, you can make a more stronger case. So they now have neuromarkers, you have brain markers, and you have behavior markers. And those things together make a stronger case that infants are conscious, okay, or at least are conscious of pain. Okay, I think just the behavior and you have similar neurostructures that in the case of adults. So you have like the similarity of structure, similar neuroactivity, and you have the behavior, and the behavior is a behavior that would correlate in our case with conscious, is a behavior that is global, available for reaction, for have an action to respond. And this together with the theory of consciousness, that is one of your questions, make the case stronger that there's evidence. So you also have to combine this with the theories of consciousness.